You are listening to the Social Science KLAI-descope. Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to the Social Science KLAI-descope with your host, KLAI. Have a very special episode planned for you all today. But before we dive into that, be sure to consider following us on Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts now, along with anywhere else podcasts are found. Follow my socials on Instagram at KMLAIII or on Twitter at KMDLAI. The deal is with today's episode is I have a very special guest that I have successfully bribed. No, I'm just kidding. But he is just an amazing person, just passionate, hardworking, and a really nice person that I had the fortune of meeting during my time at research at the New York Fed. It's Brendan Moore. Woo! Yeah, just imagine the streamers popping up. It's been a while since I've talked to you. How have you been?
It has been good. It's been it was an unexpected end to our person-to-person contact that fateful day in March when they sent us home. And at least speaking for myself, I thought that it was going to be some sort of a 2-week intermission, and then I'd be back in my cube on the 4th floor at 33 Liberty Street. And of course, we know that's not how it worked out. But it's definitely good to hear your voice again. We've chatted a number of times since, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, finally good to see you in person and not like over text message or messenger or whatever the case is. So yeah, it's good to hear that you're doing well. So Brendan is, like I mentioned earlier, a fellow RA from the New York Fed. And I know some of the listeners out there might know who you are, but for the listeners who don't know who you are or what you're up to right now, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a first-year PhD student at Stanford University studying economics. Before I came out west, so I spent my whole life on the East Coast. Whether it was where I grew up, so I grew up in Bangor, Maine. Spent all 18 years there. Graduated high school. Came to New York City, did 4 years at Columbia University, majored in economics there. Loved New York so much that I decided to stay for gainful employment for 2 years and joined Kevin and a number of other excellent RAs at the New York Fed, so their research division, where we're just helping out economists pump out very important research.
Glad to hear that you're doing well, and then hopefully Stanford is going well. I have a lot of, questions lined up just basically about your personal life and your personal journey and how you got into economics. And so I just kind of want to start with the very beginning of your education. Why did you want to study economics in the first place?
Yeah, economics was not initially a field that I considered too seriously, especially I think when you first apply to colleges, they often want to at least have a sense of what major you're going to pursue. And for me at the time, I thought I wanted to go to law school. So that was, pre-law, you can sort of do whatever you want. I had planned to major in political science. I was fortunate to run into the fact that Columbia had this sort of joint major where economics would join up with a whole bunch of different majors. There was like an economics and computer science dual major. There's an economics statistics double major or dual major rather. So it wasn't even a double major. It sort of condensed it. And there was one interesting combination that caught my eye. That was economics and philosophy. And for me, that sort of flanked each side of political science, because on one end of political science, you have political philosophy. And, you think about people like Michael Sandel and, who are basically philosophers, but also political scientists. And then on the other end of it, is more quantitative, is just trying to answer empirical questions. And oftentimes what the most quantitative political scientists are doing are not all that different from what a lot of economists do. And so that to me was interesting, because it's like, okay, well, I can sort of do this. I can get my fix of political science and then be on my way. And just the more economics classes that I took, the more I liked it. And I'd always sort of in the back of my mind also thought about, it would be fun to be a professor. It would be fun to teach college students. It would be fun to sort of be paid to research and investigate and learn about what you love, because that's what professors fundamentally do. And when I started asking around about what it took to be an economics professor, I was sort of jarred to find out how much math was involved. So I started doing a very basic data entry research assistantship with a professor part-time in the spring of my freshman year. And I was asking him about the path to an economics PhD, and he told me to take as much math as you possibly can, which was certainly a piece of advice that many students in that situation would get. But it just sort of it took me aback, and I sort of resisted it and said, no, I don't want to do that. That's not because genuinely I thought that my last math class was going to be the calculus course that I took as a senior. It was a senior in high school, and then like, okay, if I have to do this econ philosophy dual major, then I have to you have to take up the multivariate calculus, but nothing beyond that. So I was trying to stick with the minimum, and then as but as I took more economics department classes and got exposed to that, I got more interested in it, and so then I decided to put the fixed investment of taking linear algebra and differential equations and understanding that I had to work my way up to real analysis, and so that just the more I liked economics, the more I was sort of able to tolerate the pain of those math courses, because math does not come naturally to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. I have gotten good enough at it, mainly just through the coursework, that I'm surviving the first year right now. They haven't kicked me out yet.
Okay, that's good.
Like, they bring you into a PhD program, and you do like 3 weeks of quote unquote math camp to brush up on these tools before starting the year. Mm-hmm. But I've just said, like, the whole year feels like math camp, because it's just all you're doing is just a lot of very complicated algebra.
That's
yeah. But so yeah, that was the path. And then, keeping it short, but yeah, like once I got an internship at the Federal Reserve in Boston. Absolutely loved that, what research economists do. I met Kevin in the summer of 2017 when we were both research interns sitting next to each other in a small room at the New York Fed, and I absolutely loved that as well. So then, like, once I got those Fed internships and sort of saw what research was like, I was hooked, and I never turned back.
Was there like a particular professor in economics during your undergraduate career that you wanted to kind of highlight, or that kind of brought you along, or was it more, I guess, just the classes you took?
Yeah, it's always good to recognize, like, the many people who sort of like are play these small roles in your journey. For me, I would say I would credit Miguel Arquiola, he studies the economics of education at Columbia. And by the time that I took his class the spring of my junior year, so he taught a seminar for undergraduates on the economics of education. And at that point, I think I already knew I wanted to do a PhD, but he was just an excellent mentor. He really invested in me, especially at a place like Columbia, where you're sort of competing for faculty resources with graduate students who, understandably are higher on the totem pole. He gave me a lot of time and time of day, and I was able to talk with him a lot about a whole host of things, and he really encouraged my pursuit of this. And moreover, he even put me in contact with other faculty members at Columbia who I ended up collaborating with, and I'm still collaborating with, and we can talk about that later. But without actually meeting him and him sort of getting me this connection based off of what he knew my interests were, I wouldn't be working on the things that I am today. So I definitely want to highlight Miguel, and I've been talking to him over email recently, and he's actually teaching that same course right now in person at Columbia,
cool.
Which I didn't know how much in-person instruction they're doing. So yeah,
that's cool. So I guess that one professor really helped you a lot, along with, I guess, the numerous opportunities you had. So I mean, that's a very interesting personal journey, and I'm very happy to hear that it's kind of worked out so far along the way, given the many challenges that you've faced. I briefly want to actually just touch up on like math courses, because I completely resonate with you when you said that, oh, I thought high school was the last time I was going to take math, because I mean, that was honestly my thought as well. I thought calculus BC was the last time I'll take math, and clearly that was not the case. I just kind of want to go through, like, how did you deal with the adversities you faced in math? And you mentioned math is not your thing. So I just kind of want to just take me through that.
Yeah, I remember it was the spring of my freshman year is when I was taking Calc 3, because I retook Calc 1 in the fall of my freshman year, just as a sort of easing into college type thing, just to make sure I had a good grounding. And then Calc 3, I just found like incredibly hard, because it was even though conceptually I look back on it and I'm like, oh, I don't know why this is so, like, the concept of like a partial derivative isn't that hard once you've got the notion of a derivative down. But I think that just some of the I don't know, it just went fast for me, and I was struggling, and I remember I got a terrible grade on the first midterm, and I remember I turned to some like tutoring resources that like the Center for Student Advising had, and I was like really nervous about that because I remember when that same professor I referred to earlier, who I was doing the data entry for, he said do as much math as possible. I remember he said that like if he goes, have you taken Calc 3 yet? And I said I'm taking it right now. He said, okay, well you better get an A. There's nothing else you can do. And so I was not on track for that at the time, and so I ended up pulling out an A minus, I believe. And I obviously understand Lagrange multipliers well enough, where I was able to carry that for the rest of my math career. But it was just a type of thing that I think once I got a better grasp of what economists do, that was just enough of an incentive for me to sort of overcome the lack of intrinsic passion for the mathematics stuff. I have, over the years, have gotten to appreciate the beauty of math, but it still doesn't come naturally to me. But I think, like anything, the more you do of it, the more you do find specific beauty in it. So
Cool. Yeah, that's good to hear that you've kind of overcome that initial challenge. Like, yeah, I agree with you. Getting the foot in the door is always the hardest part, no matter what that thing is. It could be like finding a job, it could be math in this case. But yeah, it's good to hear that you're doing well. Has your relationship with math changed in any way outside of like appreciation? Like, do you love it a lot more, or is it still like, I prefer not to touch it if I don't have to?
I I've gotten to appreciate I've gotten to appreciate how powerful of a tool it is, because I think I used to also be of the view that, oh, okay, well, if we can just find enough quasi experiments and sort of do the Josh Angrist credibility revolution for all these important economic problems, then like you don't need to be this math and modeling expert,
Hmm.
because a lot of the math is used for modeling. And I've really gained a much deeper appreciation, um, both in the latter part of college, but then also my years at the Fed, a deeper appreciation for like the importance of modeling for answering very important economic questions. So that's a way in which I've embraced it more.
Cool, cool, cool. And so yeah, I mean, moving on from college and then the RA ship at the Fed, I just want to kind of dive into your first year of courses. That's almost not really, but like you're like, how does it work in Stanford? Is it like halfway done already, or like?
Yeah, so we're I think on week 17 of 30 total weeks of the year, divided into three 10-week quarters. And so I'm happy to say that I'm over halfway done now.
Okay.
And yeah, it's the for me, I'm taking the core classes of econometrics and microeconomics and macroeconomics. And students that are smarter than me or have had more training than me will waive out of certain specific courses. And I've seen some of this content before in some of my undergraduate coursework, but it's good to get this foundation. So it's like eating your vegetables.
Okay, I see.
I always knew that this would be what I'm going through here, and it's certainly not as enjoyable as I anticipate the
Sure.
later few years used to be. But it's I'm already over halfway home. So.
Okay, that's good. But I guess nonetheless, it's like kind of on par with your expectations of at least the first year of what grad school is supposed to be. Is there anything that maybe exceeded your expectations? Maybe something where your expectations aren't met within your first year of grad school?
I would just credit the faculty have done a really good job of committing to, because of course, contemporaneously, you're also going through this and doing it pretty much all virtually.
Hmm.
So you sort of wonder how, oh, okay, how are, I'm always someone who sort of believes that humans don't like to change their habits. I just think that that's sort of a fact that sometimes economists themselves sort of underestimate how difficult it is for people to sort of change their habits and learn new technologies. But the economists who are teaching me in this first year have done a very good job with it. So I'm really appreciative of the lengths they've gone to try and make this experience as good as it can be under the circumstances. And in some cases, because of the technology, it's actually better, because all these lectures are recorded, either the live sessions or pre-recorded sessions. And so I can, go back and rewatch part of the lecture that if it were live, I just would have to rely on my memory and my notes.
Hmm. Cool. All right, so I guess we're gonna move on to a more, I guess I would want to say fun part, because we're gonna put aside eating the vegetables of your, typical micro, macro econometrics, though important. We're gonna put that aside for a bit. I want to talk more about your interest in economics, and specifically what type of field are you like particularly interested in?
Yes, I'm moving from the vegetables to the meat and potatoes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested, as you know, Kevin, in labor economics, and just the study of why do people earn what they earn? How do people find jobs? What are the consequences of job loss? How do public policies interact with the labor market? So all these sort of questions that labor economists try to tackle, I've just always been really, really drawn to, and Kevin can attest to this. Even back in, when we were interns, I just was really drawn to these questions, and I always received advice from various people who know much more than I do about economics and have had much more experience in the field. They would always say that, oh well, yeah, your interests are probably going to change. Don't get too locked into one area. Just try and learn as much as you can. And I've like taken all that good faith advice, and yet my passion for it has not changed one iota. If anything, I've sort of solidified my interest even more within labor economics, and I'm just really excited to tackle a whole host of questions about the job market and about how people make their living.
That's good. That's good. How did you get interested into labor economics, right? Because it's not like we say out of the blue, oh, I think I want to tackle these problems. There might be, is there kind of a story that drives that?
Yeah, right. People's formative experiences, I think, often direct what they want to study in economics, and I'm certainly no exception to that. So where I grew up in Bangor, Maine, so it's like the Penobscot River Valley. It's kind of the northern but central-ish part of the state, not as populated. It was once like considered, actually, the Bangor, Maine was considered the lumber capital of the world. Now, this is going back like 100 years. But even more recently in my lifetime, there was still quite a lot of like paper mills that provided stable, good-paying work to people who oftentimes only had a high school education. And indeed, it propped up the entire towns. You'd have these towns of 5 or 10,000 people that happened to be on the river, and they had a thriving paper mill there, and that just fed back into the local economy. There were these virtuous circles and the multiplier effects. And I remember from 2008 to 2014, so like especially formative years, because I'm as old as I'll ever be living in Bangor, Maine. From like middle school to high school, there were like a 6 or 7 paper mills of the like 10 within an hour drive of my house, all shut down for various reasons. I mean, I think a lot of it was like declining global demand for paper, but then also, there were these paper mills in Brazil that were so much more efficient. They were like literally mobile. They would actually like cut down all the lumber in a certain radius, and then like they would like move, and like the plant would move. And so the technology was pretty remarkable. But so for a whole host of factors, and of course the Great Recession, you just had like this devastating series of job losses, and people that I knew. I had an assistant baseball coach who had worked at one of the mills for like 20 years. And so I sort of personally saw the consequences of job loss in my own life. Thankfully, not anyone in my own family.
Mm-hmm.
And that just sort of motivated me to look at the labor market from that perspective in particular, because unemployment is not only bad for the economy in the sense that people cut back on their consumption and they don't spend as much, but it's incredibly nerve-wracking. There's a lot of uncertainty about when the next job's going to come. We know that it has real effects on mental health and happiness. People report that they're not happy at all when they're unemployed. So there's a whole lot of human and psychological tolls to it as well. Of course, there are other reasons as well. I mean, so like the dignity of work is one of the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. I'm a practicing Catholic, and so there's a whole lot of like writings by various popes in the last 100 years in their encyclicals or their papal letters, just talking about how important the dignity of work is. And it's like the pandemic has even reinforced my view, where I think the pandemic has taught us that we rely deeply on workers that we often overlook, from like delivery and maintenance and warehouse workers, truckers and nurses and people doing childcare. So that's all these experiences sort of together. But I guess if you're going to ground it, it's probably, growing up in Bangor. And it's everything as I've sort of progressed through, I often will view through the prism of how we can make the world better for people who are working.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great story. It's really cool to see how your childhood has kind of impacted the kind of trajectory that you want to take in life, and that's something definitely we always want to see, and something that feels good, you know. So I actually just kind of want to get your input because, at least in the purposes of my show right now, you're kind of like the expert in labor economics, whether you label that yourself or not. And so I just kind of want to get your take or your opinions and your viewpoints of what do you think are the biggest problems or biggest topics that are tackled by labor economists today?
I think one of the most concerning areas of labor economics that I don't really know what the best way to address it is, but it's certainly a concerning trend in the last 40 years, is occupational polarization, and particularly catalyzed by what's called routine bias technological change. So if you sort of imagine three bins of occupations, you sort of have your high skill professional occupations, you have your sort of middle skill, production and clerical tasks, and then you have sort of your lower skill retail or in person service sector, which sort of correspond. You can sort of map those both onto skills and then onto low, medium, and high wages.
Mm-hmm.
What we've seen in the last 40 years is a very rapid contraction of those middle skill jobs, administrative and production. And then you've seen a rapid rise in both the high skill and the low skill types of jobs. So that's just how labor demand has evolved over the last 40 years. And economists such as David Otter and Doron Acemoglu and Richard Bernane and Frank Levy all talk about how this is probably due to skills bias technological change, but particularly routine bias technological change. So the idea that the technology is differentially displacing tasks that were done by middle skill workers. And unlike certain types of technology that can enhance a worker's productivity and actually increase their demand for what they do, it takes up enough of what the automation, or I should just say the technology more broadly, takes over enough of a task such that the entire job sort of goes away. So that's why you've been seeing this declining relative employment share in these middle skill jobs. And so for me, I find that a concerning trend because it's a macro trend. It's been going on for a long time. I don't believe that there's any clear, simple policy solution. I mean, a lot of people, I think, in response to this very trend, you sort of hear a lot of discussion around like a universal basic income. And for me, that is sort of off the mark for a couple reasons. I mean, number one, it's not clear that the universal basic income like shifts the labor demand in any fundamental way, that you have these technologies that are still going to be differentially sort of displacing tasks in this middle of the distribution. So the UBI doesn't really do anything on that front. And then on the other front, I mean, so it's the universal basic income is just very it's designed to be more stingy. So I mean, the people who have sort of gone from these jobs that were in the middle skill of the distribution, and then they either fall out of the labor force entirely, so they're not getting any labor income, or if they just take up a much more low paying job, it's not clear how much the UBI is really going to help them. And of course, it's the issue of targeting. So for a couple of reasons, I don't particularly think that the UBI is the compelling response. To be more succinct, skill bias technological change is one of the issues that I have thought a lot about, and I hope at some point in my research career to write papers and continue to sort of think about it, and also just think about what policy responses we can do to address it, because it directly maps onto what people sort of see as like the decline of the middle class, where you have this sort of increasing share of highly skilled college educated workers, but then also a somewhat increasing share of people who are doing jobs that are closer to the minimum wage, that are not as productive, and it's just harder to make those jobs more stable or more well remunerated.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing your insight. I do realize that, based on all the things that you've been saying about displaced workers, and kind of skills, I see that at least on your personal website, that your personal research as of right now kind of touches on these topics, maybe not necessarily suggest a policy, but definitely, attempts to study these things. What does your work in displaced workers look like right now? What kind of ideas do you have for in the future? Take me through the research agenda here, your research agenda.
I appreciate it. So I'll say that this is work that sort of started out of my senior thesis, but is continued through and is joint work with Judy Scott Clayton and Veronica Manaya, both of Columbia's Teachers College. They're faculty members there, and we have two different papers that study distinct issues using the same data set from workers in Ohio, where basically, so what we're able to show, we take a few facts as given. Number one, when it's economists have known for the last 25 or 30 years that when workers lose their job in a mass layoff and they've been working at that job for a long time, their earnings never really recover to the same level on average. It's pretty remarkable. You can sort of see these graphs, and the earnings scarring, as economists call it, is persistent even like 10 years after you lose your job, which is pretty remarkable. It's understandable that you would have a drop in earnings for perhaps the year or two after. But the fact that these scars persist show that displacement is very, very costly. So the first paper that we have, that Judy and I have, is we sort of are trying to dig into why we think this is. And so we look at the effect of firms and the role of firms in the labor market. This is something that economists, more labor economists, are studying the role of the firm in the labor market, and I think it's a very exciting development. So what we find is that a quarter of that earnings scar, where you sort of never get back to the same level you initially were, is just due to the fact that the types of firms that displace workers often are like higher rent firms, or they have a higher firm premium. So like the idea that two different firms might pay the same, like identical worker, different wages. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. Like one of the firms could be more productive. There could be like a rent sharing agreement, like a union that gives a higher wage to the worker. It could be compensating differentials. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why two different firms might pay the same worker differently. And we just show that for displaced workers, a sizable chunk of that scarring effect is just due to the fact that they are displaced from a more generous firm, and then they find reemployment in the long run with firms that don't have as generous pay policies. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of our papers. And then the other paper is sort of gets at this idea of like transitioning occupations and or trying to upskill. And there's a lot of different ways to sort of think about this question, and a lot of people have. And so this is by no means necessarily the best way to look at it, but we just wanted to look at this one dimension where we were fortunate that we have this data of displaced workers from Ohio. We have it linked to educational records at the post-secondary level. So we see for every single worker in Ohio, we see if they've ever attended public college in Ohio. That can be community college, that can be four-year college, it can even be a technical school, as long as it's publicly funded. And so when we see those enrollment records, what we then ask is, okay, how many displaced workers then go and receive some sort of retraining through the public university system? Because you would think, especially if you're being displaced in industries that are in decline, or you're just sort of fearful that you're not going to be able to get a job in the same industry in which you've worked for some of these reasons that we've talked about, whether it's like skill-biased technological change or there's automation and trade are often just like the two sort of broad concepts, and people say, okay, this is like particularly hard on manufacturing jobs, but there's a lot of other forces on a lot of other effects of different jobs. So if you're faced with that force, okay, maybe you go and you retrain, you try and go to a different industry. So we just wanted to answer the simple question of, well, how many of these displaced workers even go back to school at all, let alone finish a degree, let alone actually make the transition to a new industry and maybe they become gainfully employed down the line. So just to answer that first question, we are able to exploit the linkages in this data, and we find that for every 100 displaced workers, only about one end up going back to college at all. And even then, like among those people, not everyone gets a degree. And when I say college, again, that could be 2-year, that could be 4-year college. Mm-hmm. So it's a really tiny fraction of workers, and we can subset it on a whole bunch of different workers. So like the ones you might be most concerned about might be manufacturing workers who are displaced from their jobs. And even for them, it's like for every 100 displaced manufacturing workers, I believe it's like 2.5 workers go back to college there. So it's higher than the average, which is encouraging, but it's still quite low. Mm-hmm. And one thing that Judy and I and Veronica talk about is that, it's not clear what the right level should be. I mean, the right level should not be 100. We don't need everyone who loses their job in a mass layoff to go back to college, whether that's community college or four-year college. But given this sort of structural trend, we don't think the right number is zero either,
Right.
or close to zero. So those are two of the exciting displaced worker papers that I've been very fortunate to work on over the last several years. And it's been both a cool experience for me as a new researcher, learning about the field, but then also, of course, learning about these issues that I care about.
So you mentioned that, displaced workers typically, make less in maybe their next endeavor, or maybe when they get back into the job market, they make considerably less. Do you have a exact idea or estimate of, how long that would be? So like 4 quarters, 8 quarters, or is the evidence not there to kind of suggest that time frame?
We find, and this is actually one of the most, I would say, the one of the most well-established findings in empirical economics, is that for the average worker, their average wage never recovers to the same level. It really flatlines probably after maybe 2 or 3 years. Depends on the data set that you're looking at. But this is a pretty robust finding, both not only in the United States, where we use Ohio data, but the seminal paper on this used Pennsylvania data. A recent AER paper last year, similar question, displaced workers, uses like Washington State data. So not only within the United States, but even like you could find a whole bunch of papers using German data that document the same earnings scarring pattern. That's very striking. That I think, to me, it shows that perhaps economists, have at least going back a couple of decades, underestimated the cost of job loss, because this is just a finding that keeps getting replicated over and over. And it does not mean that workers who, certainly there are workers who get displaced and then they end up finding another job and they actually end up earning more than they actually initially would have, which is an encouraging thing. But on average, it's, you don't get back to the same level that you would have been at had you not been displaced.
It's cool. Yeah, that's definitely interesting to hear. It's really cool to hear about your research on displaced workers. Just curious, do you have anything like lined up, or any kind of questions or ideas that you want to try out that you want to share?
Well, in addition to, of course, the famously arduous and long research process of turning around papers and resubmitting them. In addition to that, I would certainly like to address the skill bias technological change question in some capacity. Another area of economics that I'm interested in, or another area of labor economics that I'm interested in, I tend to have a narrow scope, but is occupational licensing really fascinates me. And there's a lot of there's some economics research on it. There's an economist named Morris Kleiner at the University of Minnesota who seems to be the king of this research. He has more papers in this than almost everyone else combined. But it's some large fraction, like 25% or 30% of the labor market is occupationally licensed. Whether that's like a licensing for nursing or like passing the bar for lawyers, obviously medical licenses, but even licenses for barbers, and in a couple states, florists have to be licensed, and you get this like very large spread of occupations. Certainly like the massage therapists, a whole bunch of jobs that like the requirement in the state is you have to do this upfront training, and that basically like restricts the labor supply into the occupation, but it raises the wage. And economists, their intuition is often that this is not good for welfare. And in fact, there's a couple of papers out there sort of convincingly making this case that overall for consumer welfare, because the price just gets passed on to the consumer. And certainly one reason behind occupational licensing is safety, that you don't want an unlicensed doctor doing your surgery, and most people agree on that. But like the lower down the riskiness of the occupation that you go in terms of the consequence of error, there's an argument that, okay, maybe you don't need these stringent licensing requirements. You could allow more workers to enter the occupation. That would lower prices. That'd be better for consumer welfare. So I'm interested in that area of labor economics as well. And I guess like my only other thing to add to it too is that I certainly buy the argument that it could be welfare enhancing to basically reduce excessive occupational regulations through occupational licensing. But I do wonder, sort of going back to what we talked about earlier about the skills bias technological change,
Hmm.
where the middle skill jobs are sort of declining. You have fewer and fewer of them. I sort of do wonder quantitatively just how big of a force occupational licensing could be for, in some sense, serving as a countervailing force against that, because it is basically allowing some occupations, perhaps in the middle skill, like some of those middle skill occupations, to be capturing some rents by restricting the labor supply.
Hmm.
And so, in some sense, you almost wonder, in a world without any occupational licensing for, HVAC and for barbers and some of these middle skill jobs, like the trades, you could almost imagine that skill bias technological change would have decreased the employment share of middle skill workers by an even larger magnitude. So maybe occupational licensing actually plays a story in that
Hmm.
skills bias technological change that I talked about. But it's a very specific area of
Sure.
labor economics. And there's a professor that I'm actually working with here at Stanford named Brad Larson, who's undertaking a few projects on occupational licensing. So I'm actually excited to get to work with him. This is very, very recent, getting to work with him.
Cool.
So hopefully that'll take me somewhere.
Dope. That's nice. So yeah, that's very interesting to hear about kind of your interests in labor economics, both like from a personal level, and also just hearing about your takes on kind of the hottest topics of research in your view, and of course hearing about your research is always a pleasure. To hearing about what you're passionate about. Just under the branch of economics, do you have a particular economist? It could be labor economist. It could doesn't have to be labor economist, but do you have a particular economist that you look up to right now?
I would say probably my favorite economist is David Otter, just by
Okay.
the various types of work that I've seen him do. Where I would say that the other thing you talk about, like, oh, what drew you to economics? I remember when I was a junior coming across some of his research, and then like once I saw that, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Like this is what economists do. Okay, like I'm definitely gonna keep going in it. Yeah, it's an interesting example, because I still am motivated by a lot of the questions that David Otter tries to tackle today,
Hmm.
but uh, that was also what motivated me in the first place to sort of pursue economics. Yeah, I would credit him as one of many deserving people in
Right.
the field.
Right. Is there any other economists you want to particularly shout out? Like I don't have much clout on this show. Hopefully if it becomes big enough that they'll see it, but is there anyone else you want to like shout out in terms of not only your development but uh someone you look up to or you find their research cool?
Yeah, so I would say Stephanie Stancheva, who I was really fortunate to work with one summer. The summer that I worked in Boston, I did some part time RA work for her, and you talk about, like, there's so many incredible people in this field that
Yeah.
you just are so fortunate to meet. But she is really advancing the frontier of optimal taxation literature and research in a really impressive way. Like, given just how young she is, and she's sort of been able to communicate uh, issues of inequality and capital and income taxation. And she's already had some very influential papers, both within the field, but then also just as a recognized as like a public economist more broadly. And I think that she's on like the France's equivalent of the Council of Economic Advisors. So it was pretty exciting to get to work for her, and she was just a good mentor for the summer that I got to know her. And it's really been exciting to sort of continue to see her star rise.
Cool.
I would also give a shout out to Stephanie Stancheva at Harvard.
Cool, cool. That's really cool to hear. So we've heard about pretty much everything economics and all about your personal journey. It's been really fun and definitely. I mean, there's some things that I've just learned today too. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. I thought we'd do a little fun thing. So
Okay.
this will be the what I would like to call the quote unquote Q&A game. So basically,
Mm.
I'm gonna ask you 10 questions, and I want you to respond as fast as possible, or basically the first answer that comes to your mind. Let's say.
Okay. That sounds good.
All right. So first question: last thing you ate?
Last thing I ate was scrambled eggs this morning.
Okay. Favorite color?
It's red.
Okay. Last thing you did outside the house?
I went for a bike ride to the neighboring suburb just east of Palo Alto.
Cool. Last song you listened to.
That would have been, I don't know the song, but I'll shout out the band. It's called Mischief Brew, and they are a folk punk band from Philadelphia that has a lot of really good tracks, and they're sort of obscure. I'm not the type of person that listens to a lot of obscure bands. It's a lot of mainstream stuff for me, but I like Mischief Brew. So.
Okay, cool. Last TV show you watched.
I just started watching Billions, and I think that was the last. I just finished season 1 of Billions.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah, exactly.
Um, how many hours of sleep do you get per day?
It's gotten better since college. I now get on average, and I'm tracking this now, 7 hours a night.
7 hours a night. Well, what were you
Uh,
doing
uh,
before?
uh, uh, on average. Oh gosh, it was like 5.5 probably.
Okay. I think
Yeah.
I think I've regressed. I think I've gone the opposite direction. I'm doing like 5, 6 hours now, so
Well, they say as you get older, you can sustain that though. So if you're getting more younger, then that's a good thing.
that's very encouraging to hear. But I mean, hopefully you didn't catch wind of that as I sent you like a response email at like 3 a.m. or something like that, something crazy.
Right.
All right, seventh question. Favorite New York Fed memory?
I think my favorite memory that was, I guess, is not it's outside the realm of monetary policy, but I think it qualifies, is I loved when the New York Fed brought in Andy Byford, who at the time was the chair of the MTA, the Transportation Commission in New York. He came in and he sort of talked up his plan for the New York City transit system, which was basically to modernize the signaling system and improve bus speed, and he was such a dynamic presenter. He loved trains like just about anybody I've ever met, and I was totally sold on his direction for New York.
Cool. All right. All right. Number 8, Shake Shack or In and Out?
I think I like Shake Shack, and oh man, yeah, I got to go Shake Shack. I have not had In and Out while I've been here in California, but I've taken a couple West Coast trips in the last couple of years, and I've gotten In and Out plenty of times, and it's quite good. It's very bare bones, and and I lived in college. I lived above a Shake Shack.
Okay.
Probably wasn't good for me, so I'm gonna go with Shake Shack on that.
Okay. Don't be offended, West Coast. He's an East Coast
Yeah,
boy, so
yeah,
you can
unfortunately.
understand his answer. All right. East Coast versus West Coast. Which do you prefer more?
But my heart, but perhaps in concert with my answer to the last question, I'd say my heart is still with the East Coast. But I have been really pleasantly surprised about the degree to which I'm liking the West Coast.
Okay.
I mean, gosh, today it was a high of 75 degrees, and we went biking, and it's people are very relaxed out here. I mean, it's as advertised. I knew that's what I was doing getting into.
Hmm.
So a lot of the things I like about the West Coast, but and I think it's mitigated in some sense that I don't have a car out here, so I haven't been able to get around quite as much. But like the transportation in New York City, I think was amazing, and how you could easily move about the city of 8 million, and then when you did have a car, you could go somewhere and you'd be in a whole new city in like an hour because everything is relatively dense, and it's an older part of the country, is a lot more unique little like obscure places that people don't know about. So for a lot of reasons, both personal and social and all that, and geographic, I think I like the East Coast.
All right. I'll be waiting for you.
That's right. We'll look forward to making my way back to New York.
All right. Last question. One thing you miss about New York?
I can only give you one. I mean, so you can't. This is a podcast form, so this doesn't mean anything to anyone but Kevin, who's looking at my webcam. As you can see, the New York City subway map that I have just over my shoulder. But the thing that I miss about New York is, I played pickup like touch football with our esteemed colleague Jason Bram and a lot of his friends on the Upper West Side. Well, actually, and again, Kevin, you of course joined me one time.
Yeah.
So that was when we played in Morningside Park. But then soon after that, we switched over to Riverside Park.
Right.
And so throughout my 2 years there, I was always going up on Saturday mornings and playing touch football with Jason and his buddies, who were mostly all lived on the Upper West Side. And I like that about New York, where there were enough people around to sort of do that. And, it was, a pretty vibrant community. But And I almost feel like I could have given a better answer than that because there's so much I like about it. But that's the one I gave, and so I'm going to stick with
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Definitely,
it.
community is
For
definitely
you,
important.
well, for you, it's got to be the ultimate community. I
Yeah,
don't know.
well, I mean, without the pandemic, I would be going crazy right
Mm.
now. So,
Right.
and who knows, maybe this podcast wouldn't have existed if it was still ongoing. So,
Mm.
there are some upsides, downsides here and there, but yeah, community is definitely for me. But okay,
Mhm.
cool. But yeah, that was all the questions I had for the game today. Thank you so much for participating, and as always, wonderful answers.
Well, I appreciate it. It reminds me of when John Oliver started his show. He does like a topic like per week, and like his second ever episode that he did was on like the death penalty, just a very heavy topic for a comedy show.
Yeah.
And he made jokes about how like, hey, either the show is going to get canceled or it's guaranteed to only get better. Because you can't get worse than the death penalty. So in some sense, I hope I'm that version of that of what how that was for John Oliver. Your podcast is going to continue to grow, and you're going to
Oh,
get more listeners, and it's going to be even better week after week
thank
or
you,
month
thank
after
you,
month.
thank you so much. Appreciate the vote of confidence there. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was wonderful to have
Thank you for
you.
having me. Mm.
And is there anything you want to plug, like any kind of social media or any kind of website? Where can we find your research, stuff like that?
Yeah, I have a website that I created. It's the URL. It's bemoreeconomics.com. So yeah, I'll plug that.
All right, cool. So bemoreeconomics.com is the link to find all his updates on his, recent research, and maybe some other cool stuff that he'll add. We don't know. Stay tuned. But yeah,
I do have an interesting page on there where I abandoned infrastructure that I visit at random spots on the East Coast, whether in Maine or Pennsylvania or West Virginia. I have a page on there. That's the most exciting page on that
there you
website.
go. There you go. All the more reason to visit the page. But
Mhm.
yeah, once again, thank you to our guest, Brendan Moore. Wonderful to have you on the show. If you want to know more or you want to learn more about the show or stay up to date, be sure to follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Hope you enjoyed the interview, and I have a couple more interviews planned as well. So yeah, thanks so much. See you next time on the Social Science Kaleidoscope.